Hi, everyone. Can you hear me on the Zoom? Can you hear us okay? If you can give me a chat out.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. We're gonna get started in 2 minutes. We are just getting our safety things in place, and we're gonna get started in 2 minutes. We have people getting their temperature checks and coming on in. All right, thanks for your patience and welcome to this critical topic. Everyone, thank you for your patience. We were gratefully had a representative, Jeff was here from News 10 covering our story. So welcome everyone to our monthly peak roundtable. We're going to appreciate your patience as we're operating in a hybrid model, trying to recognize we have caregivers and parents here on site as well as online. We have stakeholders. Welcome everyone that is on Zoom. I am Sarah Taylor, the project director for PEAK, and I am also a member here at Pentecostal's Power of Deliverance under the leadership of Pastor Cross, Bishop Cross and Pastor Cross, who have graciously opened up their doors here at the church since the fall to allow us to come into one of the hardest hit areas of the city when we talk about healthcare disparities, when we talk about poverty. Being here in zip code 14621 and 14605 is really important. And here at the church, we do believe that we have a role. We have a role not just for souls, we have a role to reach beyond the walls of our church to make a difference in the community. So we alternate east side, west side every other month. Last month we were over at Swan, and this month we are here on the east side. So today, our topic, we are so grateful that we have experts here that are going to talk to us today about communicating with law enforcement during a crisis. I don't think I have to go on and on to let you know, as a community, we have been in a crisis for a while. And I think it's critically important that we come and talk about this in a way. We see, we're not placing blame, but the reality is we have to go in and educate our parents, grandparents, and members of our community. How do we effectively communicate with law enforcement during a crisis? Again, I've been hearing from particularly Black and brown parents with males, Black and brown male boys with mental health conditions that are terrified right now. They are terrified, and rightfully so terrified. We know, I'm not going to relive what we've seen back in September regarding Daniel Prude, what we've seen with the 9-year-old, nor what we've seen last week. Our prayers go out to those families. I want to make that clear. Our prayers and thoughts, every circumstance is different, but we don't believe mental health should be criminalized. And we have to figure out a way. How do we educate our families about communicating effectively with law enforcement during a crisis? And so we are happy today to, not that we have to have this conversation, but we are fortunate enough to be able to have it and share it. We have some experts in the room that we are going to hear from. We have a retired law enforcement officer, we have a mental health clinician, and we also have a community liaison, a mental health expert that are going to talk to us today. The first person that I'm going to have come forth is Naomi Davis. She is a clinician, a licensed mental health social worker. I want to remind everyone that this session is education and resources. This is not therapy or a clinical session. I like to give that disclaimer. This is information and resources. And Naomi is going to talk to us. We know right now there's a heightened level of distrust. We also know that there's also emotional roller coasters. When we see someone lose their life, or we see a child handled the way we've seen a child, there's a lot of emotions that come with that. Regardless of how you view your thoughts are, how and why and what happened, there's still a lot of emotions in our community with this. So with that said, Naomi's just going to share for a few minutes of how important recognizing that this is heavy. This things that have happened in Rochester that have made national news is extremely heavy. And so we are going to have Naomi come forth and just talk a little bit about the emotional toll that it has taken. And before we get started, I just also want to recognize the Wilson Foundation, who sponsored our bag lunch today. We do have some stakeholders that are supporting us. and we want to thank them for sponsoring our lunch today. So Naomi, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
One of the things that I wanted to point out is that we're talking about mental health, and I talk about mental health as being something that we all experience. We all have gotten physically ill at one point, haven't we? And I'm sure that we all have had experiences where we were down. You know, we were down, we were not leaving the house, or not because of COVID, but because of the way that we felt. So we were mentally ill. Now, we may not have had a mental disorder, but we were mentally ill. So mental illness is a common experience. When I think about the things that are happening in our city, in our state, in our country, and in the world, when I saw what happened with Floyd, I was in Germany, and I watched how Europe responded to what was happening in America, and I was overwhelmed myself, but Europe was also overwhelmed. So when I went outside, the Germans were speaking about it. They were concerned. They were out protesting. They were protesting against the things that were happening in our country as well as in other countries. My heart was warmed because I was traumatized by what was going on, because you hear things, but you hear about people being stopped and things going bad, and in the back of your head, you're thinking, okay, they're in the wrong place, they're not, they didn't respond the way they needed to respond. But when we saw on the news, and as we're hearing here, some people were not doing the wrong thing. They were not in the wrong place, so to speak. They were just being approached by people who were not seeing them the way that they needed to be seen. Now, that is not every police officer. I want to make that very clear. I know that. We know that. That is not every police officer. But when we experience such trauma in our community, we don't know who is the right one, or who is the one who's going to be, doing the right thing or the appropriate thing, or the one who may have had a bad day. They may be mentally ill and and working that day. So when we come, we need to recognize that we're all as a community experiencing this trauma. So as a community, we need to respond and be nurturing to one another, caring to one another, and helpful to one another as we move forward. I think of this as another civil rights movement, period. And during the civil rights movement of the 60s and before, they met and they strategized and they practiced. How do we respond? They practiced with people spitting on them and with people doing harmful things to them, so that when they went out in the streets, they had it right. They knew how it felt when somebody was doing something inappropriate. We need to do that today. We need to recognize that it is not about you being disrespected, and I'm going to respond to you because I'm disrespected, because that's what children think. And they get into a whole lot of trouble because they think that you're supposed to respect me too. We're not in that situation. We're in the situation that we have to make wise decisions and wise choices as we move forward. And we have to remember that this is a difficult time. So we have to take care of ourselves emotionally. If that means that we need to go out and talk to somebody, if we need to get into treatment, we need to do that. If that means we need to talk to our ministers, if we need to talk to our friends, we need to do that, because we need to be healthy. Because when we go out on the streets, there are things happening, and we don't know what's going to happen out there. So we need to be prepared emotionally, physically, intellectually, as how we're going to respond, so that we as a community can rise and we can make it through this time, so that we can grab our allies who may not be African American, and that we can walk through this and we can rise as a country. So today we're going to hear more things for us to be wise as we are approached. I know I've been stopped several times, and yeah, I have, because I speed. So I can say I've been stopped all across country. So we need to, so, I'm just of that, and I'm thankful and grateful that that things didn't happen, responding in the way that he's gonna tell you today to respond, because, why are you pulling me over? I didn't do anything. So I'm thankful, I am thankful that it didn't go sideways for me. But for some of us, it had gone sideways, and for some people, they didn't survive. And so I'm thankful, but we're going to get some information today that's going to help us so that we can be prepared and we can make wise decisions when we're stopped. We can make wise responses. We can make wise gestures when we're stopped. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Naomi. And again, we have set it up where both Zoom as well as in-person sees them and they're facing them. So I am happy our next speaker is a retired police officer and who served this community and served this community well and is now retired. And we are just so fortunate enough to have him as one of the leaders here at this church that is active in this community with our outreach. And he's going to tell us from his experience as an officer, what are some of the techniques, not techniques, language that we can use, however he comes forward to share. Okay, Mr. I don't want to say officer anymore. Herb, we're calling it Herb. Okay, all right, thank you so much. If you can.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Herb Everson, retired from the Rochester Police Department, 27.4 years. In that time, I worked several in the capacity of a patrolman, working east and west side. Also worked as a crime prevention officer. That job entailed one my community, which is the west side Genesee section, and interacting with the community. After which I went back to patrol and during that time, I also worked in internal affairs, where I worked investigating cases with complaints with officers from citizens and just internal investigations. So I have a little experience as far as being on the road and interacting. One of the things I wanted to bring to you, also while working as a police officer, we started a group called Rochester Association of Minority Police, which it consisted of minority officers. And what we saw was a need to have us get out, the officers get out and interact with the community. People who looked like us, because too many times the communication level was not there with our young African-American males. So we reached out and we told them one of the things we did, we had a class of instruction, what to do when stopped by the police. Now, for some communities, they don't have a conversation, but we know as, especially mothers, they have to have a communication with their son saying, hey, this is what you need to do. Because more times than not, they're concerned about you coming home that night. You leave out, you go to school, whatever. So one of the things we did, we gave them instructions. Naomi touched on it. One of the things that we found that everybody doesn't have a great day sometimes. One day you're having a bad day. We know if the if law
I
enforcement's
know, I
having a
don't
bad
want to
day,
turn it on.
you're having a bad day.
See, I want,
More
I
time
can
than
admit
not,
them,
you're not necessarily the noise.
they gotta tell me their name.
So
I'm not trusting anybody.
one of the things we did was instruct them how to be respectful, even when they're having a bad day. And one of the things I want to stress, being law enforcement, I just shared that story. I remember being on the road one time and a young kid said, "There's crooked officers." And he was shocked when I said, "Yes." And he jumped back and he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Where do you get law enforcement personnel from?" I can see him thinking. I said, "You get it from communities." I said, "No, we have vetting situations where we can lay out and get rid of some people, but some people are more talented getting around things. We get those people from there, and some of their biases or some of the things that they have within them, can be hidden deeply." So when I told him that, he got on. He said, "Man, you're the first one I've ever had an officer tell me something like this." I said, "Yes, that's the case. We're people. Remember, these law enforcement officers are people. And in lieu of all the stuff that's been going on recently, some things I don't agree with. Some things it's training. I have personal opinion. One of the things I noticed for myself was the communications was not there sometimes. And not necessarily from the officer, it's the stuff they get. People have to remember, and education, constant education, when we call police, you're not talking to the officer who's going to respond. You're talking to a communicator, a dispatcher. So you got to remember, when you're calling in, you got to give them all the information. You want to give them all the information regarding someone who has a mental health issue. He's been known to do this. He's known to do this. Have them understand. That way, when the dispatcher, there's been some changes since I've left. I've been gone 6 months. They have what they call a fit team, I believe now. That goes out, their mental health group, which is great. But in the last case that we've seen, again, it's my personal thing. I can't speak for Rochester Police Department because I'm not a police officer anymore. But we also have to be mindful when they get these calls in, dispatcher gets it. There's so much time. If you're calling out for help, you don't want them to say, "Oh, wait a minute, we got to send this person, this person, this person." When there's a fire in your house, you don't want the police to show up first, not with the hose and the water. Am I right or correct? So we have to be mindful of it. It's the same in regards to when you get a call for a stress or a crisis. Hey, I have someone, he's acting erratic. I don't know if he's on this, that, or the other. Boom. All right. And give them as much information about that person if he has a history. And stress it. One of the things I learned early, sometimes you have to say something more than 3 times for people to get it. People say, "Oh, I told them." How many times you tell them? Now remember, that dispatcher is on there typing this stuff up because she's trying to get that person up to you. I'm not trying to make an excuse or anything like that, but we're all human. That's one of the things people have to remember. Then the officer gets that information. He's dispatched to the call. He's going by what he's received. Okay, he or she. Plus, once he gets there, he has to react to what is there. Okay? Again, he or she may not be having a great day. They're going to a situation that's not great. Unfortunately, and it's reality, the mental health goes beyond rank and person, individuals. People say, "Well, you're a police officer, you don't have no issues. You don't know this guy or girl just got a divorce, got their kids taken away. The boss jumped on them for this or that. So you don't know this. That's why we be human." And again, I'm not making an excuse. But being a supervisor, I've seen some of the things that happens to people. So one of the things that supervisors should do or should be doing You check me. How you doing today? People don't talk. Sometimes we don't talk. We go to work, hey, I ain't gotta be with you after these 8 hours or what have you. But that's just our side. You have to remember there's a mental stability on that person's part too. Where are they at? Where's their level? His or her level? Yes, they've been trained. They've been dealing with this all day. You don't know that officer, and I use for a fact, one of the officers was telling me the officer responded to a death of a baby. It was like a 6. And then immediately he had to go and deal with something else, a shooting. You don't think that plays mental on a person? Remember, we're talking about the human psyche. The average person doesn't get this. And this is a constant barrage. I'm not saying this is everyday thing, but consistent. What point do a person is tilted? They say the straw that broke the camel's back. Again, I'm not trying to make an excuse. But one of the key things I would stress, we have to communicate more. Reaching out to each other, educating, what to do when stopped by the police. Why do you? We also talked about when you stop, what do you do? We as an African-American culture and people of color, we tell our kids, hey, son, you get stopped walking or driving, you're more likely to get stopped than your cousin. Why? It is what it is. So you're respectful. Some things you can do and look out to for and know that officer more times than not has a name tag. Get it. Also, he may have a badge and it has a number on it. One of the tricks we used to teach young folks when we gave our seminar or classes, say, hey, I see your badge and it says 619 on it. You turn it around. Hey, Officer Smythe, 916. How you doing? Not disrespectful. People automatically correct you. Now you got it implanted in your mind. Also, when you get stopped, the car pulls up. There's always some kind of identifying number or something on it. So you may not remember the officer's name, may not remember his badge number, but he was on the west side driving on Thurston Road, heading southbound or east-westbound. All the cars are tracked. With all the computers we got, they track everything. So you may, if an officer, what you felt disrespected you, let your parent know. Or let an authority, an adult know, who can follow up. Because the first thing your parents say, who was it? I don't know, some officer, and he stopped me for no reason. I wasn't doing anything. That doesn't help. And I'm speaking also, again, as someone who worked in internal affairs. Because when people will complain, like, we have over 700 officers in the department. Which one? Where was it at? What time of day? And if you were doing something you weren't supposed to be doing, say it. Don't be afraid. Okay? That way we can find out what's going on and investigate it. One of the words that I sort of disliked because it became part of the thing in the last 2 years was transparency. Okay. I don't like that word. Personal thing. I don't like this transparency thing. Not that I don't like being forthright to people, but I don't like because people use it as anything. It's a cliche. Oh, it's we're being transparent. No, you're not. You're giving them what they want to hear to a point, and then you leave it alone. Be honest with the folks. Tell them. If you can't tell them, I'm sorry, this information is not available. People will respect you more. And that's one of the things that we've lost. We've lost respect. If you do something, say it, and then go from there. Because what I see folks like to do, especially when it comes to, as you get up in the governmental whatever, we like to discredit. What were you doing? I wasn't doing nothing. What were you not doing? Why were you there? Don't you live over here? Ah, here we go. So now we were building the case. And, you know, me and my fellas, every now and again, we like to do this or that, play craps, whatever, that's what we're doing. All right. Officer rolled up and he did this as this. And I'm not saying these things to have you gang up on an officer, but the key is I want you to be educated. What to do when stopped by the police. Treat that person like a human being, things you can look for. And again, and more importantly, he or she is a person too. They have lives, they have families, they have this and that and other things. Always remember that. Don't take it for granted. Yes, there's good and bad in everything and everybody. Yes, I said it. Good and bad in everything and everybody. So don't get twisted. Oh, how does this happen? We know we have a history of degradation, abuse, and all that for centuries. And talked about it again. There's a lot of distrust within law enforcement. Law enforcement has always, usually has been, for us, in our culture, been the arm of which those of power control you. We know that. Well, be mindful, hey, you're from this community, you're from this culture. Make sure you do your part. And then if you're like me, also, I feel mentioned, I was a field training officer. And one of the things I taught my guys, I said, hey, when you come into a Black community, we're not violent, we speak loudly. So don't go, you get called for domestic. Oh, they're loud. People start running. They get nervous. Don't do that. Don't do that. And I found several of my guys who I trained, first thing they said, you know what, Kurt, you're right. And they were calmer and they dealt with things differently. Because unfortunately, some of them aren't used to being with your culture. They grew up, they didn't have you as a neighbor or friend, okay? So, and don't hate people for that. We're supposed to be a people of love. And I ain't talking about just our culture, I'm talking about the world. If we love more, we wouldn't have as many problems as we do. Right. All right. You know, but that's the problem. I love you to this point. No, love me beyond that. Okay? But as I said to someone sometime just yesterday, you can get one person, you can get 10 people read a scripture, and you get 7 different definitions of what it said. Yep. Why is that? It's pretty plain what it said, but no, it doesn't work like that. I'm gonna stop now.
Questions? Oh, sorry.
Okay.
If anyone has any questions for brother, there's
Yes.
Lynette.
I'm wondering if you can address the training.
How
much training, or is there training specifically to deal with people with mental health disorders? What does that look like?
There is training, but as anything, everything is a cost. Somebody read a statistic to me the other day about, we get more training with firearms than we do with mental health. And I said, I don't know the answer. I did invite another colleague of mine, which unfortunately she wasn't, and she worked recruiting. She's recently retired. But she had another engagement that came up. We do get training, but the key is, one, money. The other thing is, how often do you keep, you can get it in the academy, but is it continuously being updated in a way that the officer is in its forefront? Okay, we're responding to a call of a person who has some mental instabilities, boom, boom, boom. He may be a danger to himself. They didn't say anything about a weapon, but he may be a danger to himself or others. And the person who's calling saying, I'm concerned about it. I don't want anything to happen to him. Now the officer, he or she has that in their mind, but they don't know what to expect. Now, I want the officer, and what I'm saying, I don't want the officer to ever endanger himself, but he he doesn't want anything to happen to you or someone else.
So I just wanted to add, so great question, Mr. Nett. So I read a study, and the study showed that 60% in the academy, that 60% of police officers while in the academy receive gun training, combat training, and less than 8% was dedicated to mental health. And to me, that should be a big reverse, right? So we're looking at it, we need to catch this in the policies, in the procedure, in the academy, training these officers. I think there need to be some cultural responsive, some cultural humility, cultural competency, and also more mental health training than gun training, right? So you teaching that authoritative type of thing, you feel power when you have a gun. You know, I'm gonna be transparent, as Herb said, be real, that, you know, I'm a licensed carrier. I do security, I've done all that stuff. So there's some type of authority I feel when I do have it on me, right? That power that you feel. But being able to be trained around mental health and get mental health training, and I know somebody's gonna say, well, funding and finances. Well, police officers have to get training hours, they have to get a certain amount of in-services. So utilizing that time to talk about mental health, how to respond when there's a mental health crisis, how to deal with a kid when a kid is you know, having some emotional behavioral health. So I think what Herb was also saying about how do we respond. So how do officers, not only how do Black and brown kids respond, but how do police officers respond? How do police officers respond when they get that call for a crisis or a mental health situation? But I think, like you were saying, it needs to be more embedded in training at the academy, ongoing training, in services, things like that. I just want to share with Herb. A few years ago, I worked with SWAT Youth Council. We had this big group of youth on the Safe Schools, Healthy Students Initiative. We trained police officers, school resource officers. And these were kids from a youth council that was telling police officers what works best for me. When I'm having a mental health challenge, when I'm having a big behavior in school, what works best for me? So the officers went to break. So we gave them a 10-minute break. We told them to be back in 10 minutes. Well, these officers came back in 15, 20 minutes. So the kids responded to them, you want us to respond a certain way, but here it is, you don't respect us. So in order to get respect, you gotta be able to give respect, Mr. Officer. Because I believe what you do before a crisis helps you in a crisis. That has been my theme ever since I worked in the mental health field. What you do before a crisis helps you in a crisis. So I think the things that they do before a crisis helps them when they get into a crisis situation.
And what you said is something I was thinking about. I remember you were the one that presented that statistic. One of the things I would recommend that be incorporated is, before they used to have, you know, like officers volunteer at Boys and Girls Club, this, that, and the other thing. One of the things that you do, like every 3 months, have an officer say, guess what? Today, for 4 hours, you're gonna go to a mental health area facility, and you're gonna work hand in hand. So now you get to understand, oh, I recognize that behavior. He's doing this because he's doing that. And if you do that, and now it becomes somewhat, well, not somewhat, it becomes ingrained or part of your DNA to how to handle a person with schizophrenia, or a person who's depressed, or go to a call center and hear, you know, just listen, or just sit there and you're listening to somebody who's calling them suicide watch or something like that. Now they're more apt to understand, not necessarily empathy, but you got an understanding, and that's the problem. We don't understand the other side. You can tell me this, but until you lived it, it doesn't mean a thing. Yes.
Like they have the 911, you know, for emergency, and they just recently supposed to have the 311. When the 311 come in, do they send out the officers that's, like you said, they don't have that much training in it? How come it's not as effective as the 911?
Well, I had to work right where you're talking about.
Okay.
My office was in charge of that. 311 is not emergency calls. Like, it was a dog barking or something, you know, and they work even after hours when everything else is closed. 911 is for an urgent emergency, life and death. And then you get people who have emergencies because sometimes it's not clearly defined. Well, you get to this point and it's 911 or get to this point and it's not as an emergency, call 311. And some people make the mistake and call either one of them. But if you feel it's an emergency, call 911. They can then immediately transfer you over to 311. But it's all, again, communication. What did you say? I'm having some problems with my child. He or she's not listening to me. Okay, man, what's going on? Well, they went up their room and I haven't seen them. They're now opening the door. They should be asking more questions like, what do you mean you haven't seen them? Has it been an hour, 3 hours? How do they feel? They've been feeling depressed. Some kids, you know, they didn't get an A, they don't want to go to the edge. Or others say, hey, I didn't get an A, but I got a B plus. I'll work hard to get it next time. But you know your child, or you should know your child. So, and depending on where that falls, that's how they relay or direct your call.
So there's not a special line.
No,
especially if it's a repeat. You know?
No, it's not. But usually if it's a mental health thing, again, it's depending on which the words you're using. And like I said, you know better. You know if it's a crisis. I haven't seen this person, the child. How old is the child? He's such and such age. What has he been doing? Well, he or she hasn't been themselves lately. Anything going on? Mike broke up with their boyfriend or girlfriend. You know, young folks, when they have their boyfriend and girlfriend, if they lose them, it's the end of the world.
Yeah, and if it's an emergency and we're talking about a mental health issue, you're going to express that I'm concerned that they're in there hurting themselves, or they're going to come out and hurt me. So that's the 911 piece of it, that you're concerned about safety. It's an issue of safety. Maybe they're hearing things in their head and I don't know what they're going to do. So it's an issue of safety when you call that 911. Otherwise, if it's not a 911, then it's a treatment issue that you're calling the therapist. You're calling the treatment providers to handle that. But if it's an issue of safety, you're calling 911. So I don't necessarily know that 311 would be appropriate.
And I think now our community continues to say, we got all these great resources now, diverting calls to 211, and I'm not knocking any organization. But the reality, as a parent that has called the police, that's come to my house several times for mental hygiene arrest, I go to the door and articulate just like this. It's a mental health issue. It's not a criminal justice issue. I need you to take it easy when you go in the door. This is this. I give them the whole history. And as soon as they go in, they grab her and manhandle her. So even those of us that, and again, every situation, I can only tell you my lived experience that just happened November 1st in my house when the police came, and I sat and watched, you know, so I was able, not to that extent, to see when it happened with the 9-year-old, but to say to others, oh, this stuff is real. They can't just treat our children like they're nobody, like a nobody. And we have to stop the mindset of criminalizing mental health. It is a medical condition. And unfortunately, our Black and brown children and males in the city are, and again, I'm speaking from a city resident, a parent with a child with a mental health condition, that I've watched in every effort that I know as a professional, every effort that I know as a parent to communicate before they came through my door. Now, I must say, I've had several happen at my house. One, it makes a difference. There was an officer that came in one time and he said to her, I have a child with autism who gets upset sometimes. I understand you. I need you to calm down, honey. You know, so he spent some time with her. Total different approach. You know, not to say he was an African-American cop, but I do believe if it wasn't, and it was a police officer that had a child with a disability, there would have been a different level of empathy also.
That's the reason why I suggested we should have
community service
days. Or at least 4 hours every 4 months or so, and you sit there and the officer, that would be their duty to interact with people with these type of problems or disabilities. That way they get a better understanding. Because like I said, understanding is the best thing in the world.
And I think also to go along with that, what you were saying, having that empathy type of training, right? So being empathetic to what's happening. And I know Sarah made a good point about, I've seen it in both situations, but I also feel like sometimes if that kiddo, I've seen it where that kiddo was a white kid and they got treated totally different. It was a totally different turnout, different, you know, they went in with a different approach, they're more empathetic, they showed empathy to the kid versus a black or brown kid, it turned out different. Now, I'm not saying in cases that's the way all the time, but I also think that we also need to have officers be trained in empathy, right? So as being a father, I don't want to, it hurts me to see another kid or see a child being pulled or done a certain way because I'm empathetic to that. And I think also, you know, even though you have a job to do, even working in residential treatment facilities, had to, you know, restrain, put kids in things, those things kind of broke me down because I was a father and not wanting to cause harm to another kid, you know, anything like that, because I was very empathetic. And I think sometimes you can't train that, but sometimes you can put people in certain situations, like you were saying, you know, different services, being in, you know, in services, from doing volunteer work, so that you're aware of what you're dealing with in your community, in your culture. Because I'll be honest, I mean, some of the police officers don't live in our community. You know, they live in the suburbs, so they don't know about our culture in our community. They don't know, like you said, we talk passionate. We get loud, but it don't mean that. So don't take it that way. So I think training officers on how to deal with certain things, you know, because we're passionate. And when we get passionate, we get a little bit loud, but we don't mean no harm. That's just how we are. But it's coming from a place of, you know, love for our child or our daughter, something like that. We have a question.
I'm curious about, is there, like a regular lay person, is there a language that we can say that will, you know, calm it down even before the officer get there, even on 911? Like Sister Sarah said, she told them it was mental health, and they still, you know, was a little aggressive. Is it anything that we get, words that we can say?
No, it's communicate as best as you can in the situation. Everybody's got to understand. And again, remember, you're going from you to the dispatcher to the officer. Okay? So be mindful of that. And then once they get there, like Sarah did, hey, this is what's happening. I can't say for all cases, but hopefully, Lord willing, that when you do this and you're emphasizing more than once, I have to repeat it 3 or 4 times. And say, hey, look, you've been here before. There was an officer, he knows the situation. Is it possible if you find, or you have a bad situation with another officer, you can request, I'm sorry, I need another officer. But depending on the day, anything can be going on. You're gonna get who you get. But emphasize it again.
And my last question, why is it such a disproportionate as far as black officers and white officers when we're talking empathetic and understand the culture? How come more European officers are responding to African American stuff than even you're not seeing the African American officers out there making mistakes like
there is, but again, the numbers don't necessarily reflect. I've seen. I'll go back to a situation. One day I think it was 4 of us, 4 sergeants. They were all black males, and we were standing there, and about 4 cars drove by. I ain't never seen 4 black sergeants ever standing up. Now, is that right? I don't know. It shouldn't be. We should be reflective of the community. What's the proportion of African Americans in the community and what you work in? But again, too, we have to be mindful. Can't necessarily blame it on some of the folks, but some of us don't want to do the job. I don't want to arrest my uncle, my cousin. I said, well, if he or she doing something wrong,
better unions than somebody else.
Exactly.
Jack, I need to take a step back.
Request black officers.
Not necessarily, because now you're being biased. You see what I'm saying? But you can't say, you could say, can I ask someone who has some mental health experience? You see what I'm saying? You can do that.
And then even just speaking to what you were saying, go ahead.
4 years ago, me and 500 pastors, we were in the recruit. We interviewed all the new recruits. 69% of the recruits that we were recruiting were from Dansville, Avon, who don't even know nothing about our community. Okay, so therefore they get a different perspective of what we're going to be dealing with. So then we have some people coming out of the sheriff department into the Rochester police, which is a different animal all by itself, because they're dealing with minorities. That's one of the problems. I think they serve better where they live. Okay, if you live way out somewhere, you leaving here going somewhere else, and I know lovely is kind of something because you work where you live. So.
Right, and that makes sense, because I know where you live, so you're gonna act a little bit more responsible because we know you. We know you.
And I also think, what we don't know is the whole civil service, residency, civil service, union contracts. There's so much that I, as an advocate recently, learned having these conversations. I'm a firm believer, that you should live where you work, but we also know that there's good and bad and all. And, we just cannot forget as a community, the root of some of the major issues that we have are rooted in systemic racism. No, that's not the cause of everything, but we keep as a community dancing around the bigger systemic issues that are perpetuated in this community. And it's about power. It comes down to powers. And unfortunately, what we've seen is this imbalance of power on the backs of poor people in communities of color. And again, none of us were there last week what happened, but one thing I heard from that grandma last week, okay? And this ain't over, okay? And again, we don't know what happened, we weren't there, but to see how the Gates police interacted with this young man in one condition that day. And again, we don't know, and I want to respect, the family and their loss, but we cannot keep criminalizing mental health. And we have to figure out how in every system, not just the police, some of our babies are treated horrible in these hospitals. But how do we set a tone and culture where our children are not criminalized for a medical condition, a psychiatric condition, and unfortunately, a child that is Black or brown or male is at a higher risk of their life and safety. And we have to figure out how to help them and address these systems. I know there's. You can turn up, yeah.
I have an adult son who has experienced mental health.
Come up and talk to me.
And
This is Virginia, just first name. Yeah.
I have an adult son who has experienced some mental health issues. And I have done several mental hygiene arrests on him. And it has been in Brockport and in Greece. And the difference is different. When I call to say this is what I'm doing, why I'm doing the mental health, what my son is experiencing, the police officers have come to our home, very carefully talked to him, taken him into the city, at Strong, and mental hygiene, and he was mental hygiene. Never ever did he receive any abrasive, abusive treatment?
How do you think it is? How do you think it is?
You use the term though. You said mental hygiene arrest. That means something different, doesn't it?
Yes. Mental hygiene, I don't know what the words that Sarah used when she called. She did say she had a mental, it was a mental issue.
And for me, I've worked with individuals in mental health. So I know the term.
Yeah, and even, I don't think it's the term. If you hear what Virginia's saying, coming from a middle class, perceived,
What they
middle
would
class.
perceive, right?
Yeah, in
right.
Brockport in Greece, and how one is treated just
Very
by the
cordial,
class.
very nice. They were very nice to my son. I mean, you wouldn't have, I have never experienced what some of you parents have experienced where I live, but my son now resides in the city. So I am on high alert that he could be a victim. In fact, he was on his way to work last week when the incident happened on Main Street. And I didn't know anything about the incident until he called me because he said, Mom, I was on my way to work. I was down by Big Tahoe and I saw all the cars, the cops. He said, and actually witnessed the shooting take place. And for someone who knows that they do suffer with mental health, that's being an African-American male, he was very frightened. He was very, very frightened. He thought about his own life if something like that happens with him. So it is real, and there's definitely a difference. And I can personally say I have experienced the difference in how my son is treated when he has been hygiene arrested in the suburbs versus what you have experienced when your children or adults have been mental hygiene arrested. So.
Yeah, I think you brought out a good term though. I think that's a good term. If your child is experiencing something and you know it's a mental health issue, that is a very good term. Mental hygiene arrest. As a therapist, and I don't know in New York State, but in North Carolina, I did mental hygiene arrests all the time. I had to go down and fill out paperwork. And then the police went and picked up the person that I wanted to have escorted to the hospital. So mental hygiene arrest, if she's able to use that term, I would put that out there. I believe this is a mental hygiene arrest, and this is the issue that's going on with my child. Another thing I wanted to point out, you all, if your child is experiencing things, you want to make sure that they are in treatment. You want to make sure that you're not trying to handle things on your own by yourself. Because if you, and I understand that you may go to someplace and you're not getting what you need, then go someplace else. Call around, ask around. And I use Sankofa Family Counseling. That's a program that's African American and Latinx therapists. And I'm working there now, so I'm not saying that just because I'm working there, but I'm saying that because it's a group of African American providers. And so we are aware of our cultures. Yes, we have mandated reporting and things that we have to do, but we're aware of our culture. So just because you spank your child, I'm not going to deem you as being abusive. Now, if we know when we're abusing our kids, we know what abuse is. And so, so you have to sometimes be careful about how you say, what you say when you go to certain places. If you're feeling that way, then you need to find a person of culture that can relate to what you're saying, because they're going to tell you, no, you can't do that. That's inappropriate. Okay, well, I understand that maybe you had to do whatever. But they're going to talk to you and make sure that you do what is healthy for your child. Mm-hmm. So you need to be in treatment. You know if your child needs to be in treatment. You know that they got all kinds of craziness going on in your household. Get that child into some treatment. And then when you have to call the police or have to have a mental hygiene arrest, you do have providers who can guide you and help you through that process. Okay.
You make a,
Also, I just wanted to say, make sure they're on their medication as well, because that is often an issue, that they may be in treatment, but they're not taking the medication.
that's very good.
And what you raised, Naomi, and what Virginia raised, gets to the subject of implicit bias.
Yeah.
You know, we talk about racism, but there is also implicit bias. If an officer gets a call to come for this reason, they may have that bias, that I'm gonna deal with this. And so, you know, we need to talk about that as well. I wanted to ask about the protocol, and I don't know if I want to say training, but the training protocol when it comes to the use of physical deadly force.
Deadly force is to be used when everything else is.
We need to hear this. This is life or death.
Deadly force is what it is, deadly force, and it should be the ultimate or the last resort. You have what we call tools in your toolbox. On the latest incident that I can recall was the unfortunate incident where the gentleman died from open door mission. People were saying, well, why didn't they use the taser? Well, let me educate you. I can't speak for other departments, but as far as Rochester Police Department, up until when I left 6 months ago, anybody who has a taser on them, any officer, they've been tased. Okay, that's one of the tools in the toolbox. They got mace, they have nightsticks, they have all kinds of, then the ultimate is their weapon.
Can you just talk, when you say that, so that everyone's aware, they have to go through training, they have to get tased, the officers have to be tased themselves in order to have a taser on them, or to have the temper spray, so they have to go through that type of training. So that's why a lot of officers don't have the taser, because they have to be tased themselves like 5 to 6 times.
We go through all the training and experience except for being shot, you know, it's common sense. But when we say the taser hurts, it hurts like something else. I know, I've been tased 5 times and I did a 5-second ride, 3 of them. People say 5 seconds is long. Let me tase you and you'll understand. Yes, it is. So some officers, they do not want to do that. So they don't have a taser. In this incident on Main Street, I heard from the portions that I did hear of the segment of the body cam, the officers, he requested a taser, or it was called for. Well, guess what? There was none there. Everybody doesn't have a taser, so people have to be mindful of it. And it's part of an educational thing. Then you got other things. Did the officer have his nightstick? Somebody said, why can't he have a nightstick? Well, part of the training, if a person has a brick, you gotta go up one. Maybe you need a nightstick. Maybe you need a taser. Person have a knife. People don't know. There's a 21-foot rule. 21 feet is from here to probably that pole right there. Guess what? In 3 seconds from there to here, I could be dead. We're trained. And you can use deadly force, which means using your handgun. From what I'm told, the gentleman was in 10 feet. Within 10 feet of the officer. So also what I'm being told, they had backed out, but in doing so, be mindful. You can back up so far. The other thing too, a lot of this, it's a fluid situation. From the time you get out of your car, you react. And that's, from what I understand, this is what was taking place. They see the guy, start giving instruction. We call it verbal judo, but just, hey, what you doing? Hey, put the knife down, put the knife down. Even if you're deaf, when somebody's of authority that you can see in uniform has a gun to you, pointing in your direction, something should say, put it down. Put it down, especially if they're.
If you're in your right mind.
Exactly.
If you're in your right mind.
Absolutely. Well, they backed up so far, but also remember, again, a fluid situation. What happens at anything when something happens? especially when you see lights. What do people do? They're, hey, what's going on? No, I'm not talking about the victim or the suspect. Hey, what's going on? They want to check it out.
Yeah.
Now the officer backing up, doing whatever he's doing, trying to coach the person to put the weapon down. He has to be mindful of somebody popping up going, hey, what's going on? Now, guess what? You're that person. I'm the bad guy. Guess what? Who's the next victim? Now, what do you think is going to happen? Well, the officer was there and he let that joker come and stab me and hurt me. You don't think that affects him? He's got to make split second. Again, I'm not making excuses. But we are also, part of that communication, we got to have an understanding. Like I said, understanding is the best in the world. Plus, from what I did here too, once the fatal shot was shot, you don't think that affects him? You're talking about mental health of the person. We're automatically put on administrative, no. Plus you're forced, you gotta go at least 3 times to a psychiatrist and talk about it. I can tell you from personal experience, I never, thank the Lord, had to shoot at anyone, but I came close doing an off-duty job and I almost shot someone for 3 days. I dreamed and thought about this. So be mindful of the person and the officer. You don't know how long he's gonna be out because he just took someone's life. Life is precious. Mental instability or not. It plays a psychological thing. Yes, we do need more training. We need to incorporate some things and put them in place. But again, I always got an excuse. Unfortunately, lawmakers like to double talk you and say, well, well, don't defund the police, reallocate funding to do things and make it a requirement. Okay, you want money? Okay, you're gonna be doing this, this, and this.
I think you should have a choice as far as getting tased. If you're a police officer and I'm paying your salary, that should be a tool in your weapon, in your toolbox.
No, that's your requirement. Yes.
I was gonna say too, I thought that they called in for a taser too, but isn't there, do they have to call in rubber bullets too?
No, it's some cars, like I said, every car doesn't have certain things, and everybody doesn't have everything. With the incident that happened last year, I heard someone say, and I don't want to get off keel, somebody said, well, why didn't they have a blanket? We've never had blankets. State troopers had blankets. Why didn't they cover the gentleman up? I don't know. We don't have blankets. Troopers have them. Now, since that happened and that subject came up, do we have them in the cars now? From what I'm told, no. Maybe these are some of the things, when you see stuff, don't just talk about it, and that's sadly, they call it bureaucratic, it's garbage. They keep talking, but no one's actually taking action to make a change. Now, I'm not against authority in government, but some of this common sense is free. It don't cost, you don't have to pass no law and get millions of dollars to do something, but.
So it sounds like policy and procedures need to be
changed.
Can you also make the point that police officers are trained to shoot to kill, not shoot to maim? People ask, well, why do we shoot them in the head?
Again.
Because that's some of the comments in the chat too.
Again, the training. One of the training things we do, it was an incident with I believe it was a deaf person years ago. And the person was shot, I believe they died. But I think it was a female, I'm not sure exactly. But either way, something came up and someone here at church said to me, why did they shoot the knife, because the person had a knife too, out of her hand? I said to them, I don't know that we were trained to be Will Rogers and all that. And we never get trained. One of the things you get trained to, you train to shoot the major. It's harder to shoot the limb than it is to shoot this. And you're trained to shoot this. Okay? Where the vital organs are. Center mass. Okay. Now, they're not going to change that, because if someone's attacking you, the first thing they say, well, I should take that person out. And I don't mean terminate or kill them, but you didn't stop them. Now, somebody also said, well, why did they use a nightstick? Hey, if a person has a nightstick is not necessarily the thing. Then you have to have a backup who, just in case your nightstick is not effective, take care of it. See, all these things that people don't see, and they don't take into account for all these many things. I'm not trying to make an excuse. What's right is right, what's wrong is wrong. We've seen times where police were blatantly wrong. And then we've seen times, and another thing too, you don't see the times where a deadly result didn't occur because how the officer handled it. Those statistics are never talked about too often, but you have to be mindful of that.
There were just some comments about in the chat. Guys, I'm reading some of all what's in the chat, not everything. So police officer has a choice to get tased or not. That was the question. Correct, it seems that's a policy to consider how many our PD officers have access to non-lethal measures.
All of us are trained non-lethal. Again, now getting back to statistics, Gerard brought up as far we get trained more in the firearms. Well, it's the ultimate deal. So you better know how the training. I know there was an incident, I don't know, it was just last week where a little baby got shot, I think. The officer was shooting at the suspect, but the suspect had either near or was holding the child.
No, the child was in the car, and the suspect jumped in the car to steal the car.
Yes.
The child was happened to be in the car.
Unfortunately, hey, now, I don't know the parameters, because one thing I will say, a lot of times when we see these incidents, we see this much of that situation. This much of that situation. We always do. And the first thing is we made a judgment call. Well, he didn't do da 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 da. Again, I'm not trying to make an excuse. It's right is right, it's right is wrong. You can't. You shouldn't have to teach common sense. But part of the training, you got to look at a lot of things. A lot of things in a split second. So you got to make a judgment call. This guy's racing toward me with a car, trying to hit me. Can I use deadly force? Yes. Or can I jump out of the way? Okay, it's your call. Yes.
So what if it results in a violent death, just like the child didn't die, but brain damage,
Right.
or whatever, and the officer goes on leave, to prevent these officers from overstepping or doing something other than, I know they're trained to kill, but then there are other options. If they take leave without pay, will that's
what you're saying. We're automatically put on what they call administrative leave. Basically, when they say, hey, you don't need to be, you can't do any police-related duties. You can shuffle some paperwork, basically bottom line, but you cannot or be out. You have to be away from police-related. Shouldn't be trying to arrest nobody because one, it should be a mental thing. I don't know how this officer is handling it. Everybody's different. But until the investigation is done, again, that officer should still be getting paid. Now, people argue, well, what do you mean? He should be. Look, it wasn't his intent. It's like the officer from Main Street. I honestly, I recognize the voice. I think I know the officer, but I don't think he woke up that morning and said, hey, I'm going to take someone out today.
I know, maybe not intent, but when you're bringing your own biases already.
And that's a possibility, but hopefully, prayerfully, some of the things that is evident to supervisors, and that's why you always do check-ins. Hey, how you doing today? And you have a conversation. I was a Marine security guard. One of the things we did at several embassies before I became a RPD officer, and one of the things I knew that I had to do when I got a new guy in to be at the embassy. Now, embassy is stressful. When nothing's going on, it's lovely. But it can switch in a second. And when it does, guess what? You have to depend on that individual to be up to par to handle the situation. I was there when the 225 Marines were killed in the barracks. I was in Okinawa, Japan, so I remember these things. One of the things I would do when I get a new guy in, first thing I would do, I take him out 3 times. You say, why is that? Because I want to know how he's going to react when he's at a point of ignorant drunk, because in a flash, he's got to turn around because something happened, a serious crisis, like an embassy getting hit, and he's got to perform to a level. You got lovers, you got just fighters, and then you got those who get depressed. I got to know where he's at. So I would take him out 3 times just to see, again, we're talking about mental health. Where is he or she going to be at when stuff hits the fan?
Well, you say that this officer, when he spoke to sheriff in the county where the Asians were killed, and he spoke for the department saying that y'all just had a bad day.
Now, on that, I alluded to it earlier. I wouldn't say that me personally, but those are the words that he used. I would say, I don't know how, but I probably wouldn't, me personally, I wouldn't have said that. I said, at the most, I would have probably said, an investigation's ongoing, and we hope to have more for you as soon as possible.
But that reveals his bias.
It's bias.
And that's what it is, right? I mean, I know Brother Herbert was a retired police officer, but I can call it what it is, right? We have biases, we have our own, what I call mental models, our own beliefs, assumptions. When you go into a certain community, and you deal with a certain community of folks, you have your own biases, your own mental models. So I think it makes up that. So I really believe that our police officers, I've always said it for years and felt that there needs to be more training, development. I mean, when I worked in the different residential programs coming out of school, it was, I had to be taught TCI. If I didn't learn how to do a TCI technique or restraint, I couldn't work on the floor. So why not get officers, why they can't be tased? Why they can't go through certain things to understand what we gotta go through that happens to us? So I think it should be put out there that they have to go through these type of trainings to be on the force. So, I mean, we had to learn de-escalation techniques. We had to learn how to do all of these different type of measures. So police officers as well should be learning how to do these type of measures and then how to hold each other accountable. You know, I'm glad that I saw a policy that the city is or somewhere is putting in place where other police officers have to hold others accountable if they see something that's not right. Because when I worked in the field as I saw a staff member was restraining a kid for no reason, or I felt it wasn't, I said something. I spoke up against that. And I think that when you see something, that's happening, they should be able to call out another officer. But I understand they have a code that happens. I have a friend in New Jersey, a colleague of mine, Dr. Lacey, who wrote a book a couple years ago, Black Cops Against Police Brutality. He was forced out of the police because he was a Black cop that spoke up against police brutality that was happening in their own force. So, I think a lot of the training, a lot of the stuff that has to happen, and also, as Sister Naomi was saying, erasing that stigma, the stigma of mental health, even in just our community, in the police department, in our hospital, even in our churches. There's a stigma around mental health. You go sit in a corner somewhere, we just lay hands on. Yeah, but give me some prayer and some medication. Give me some prayer and medication. Okay? So if I say my arm hurt and I go take a Tylenol, it's okay. But if I say I'm having some mental health challenges, or you look at me funny, no, it's a mental illness. It's something going on. So we need to erase the stigma across the board so that all our kids can get help. And I just want to give it to you, Naomi. We know that there's 3 places that our kids normally come in contact with the police. That's in a private place, which is our home, business, whatever, our public place, and in our cars. We see that a lot of stuff that happens in our cars. And we're going to continue the conversation around, okay, we're teaching our children now. Some of you never thought that you would have to teach your kids, look, when you go out, you got to keep your hands on the wheel, keep your seatbelt on. You know, make eye contact with the officer. Don't make no sudden moves, right? Don't make no sudden moves.
That's a lot of stress.
Keep your hand up. We have to make sure that we're telling our kids, and there's a lot of stress, but I'd rather have you alive that I can fight for you than dead fighting for you. So I know it's a lot of stress, especially when we talk about trauma, mental health, our kids who are dysregulated. And that also, we just want to teach our kids and have our kids adjust. Officers need to adjust. Police officers need to adjust as well. So it's going to take a top-down, bottom approach. And it's going to take more community conversation. You know, there's resources. There's, you know, if your kids have some type of big behavior, you got to get someone in. Mobile crisis is there for you. You can call 211 or 318 to connect you to a mobile crisis. Sometimes they're helpful, sometimes they're not. As Sister Naomi saying, get your kid connected to a mental health provider. And listen, embrace that stigma. Get your kid some services that they need services. See me, see Naomi, we will get your kids some services or point you in the right direction to get them services. Because we want to be able to be an advocate for them, make sure they get the services. I just want to wrap up you, Sister Wade, you're so right. There is a difference. I've seen in my professional work, I've seen kids get mental hygiene from Brockport, Spencerport, and it's some of the things I read in the report. And I looked at one kid about 6 months ago, and I looked at he's 16 years. I said, are you still alive? He was a white kid. I mean, he spit at the cop. He was lounging at the cop. He was doing all these type of stuff. And I'm like, you still alive? You did all of that and you're still alive? You know, and it made me think about that. I'm like, wow. Like, what are they doing out there that we're not doing here in the city, right? So what do we need to do to look at? So I think it's going to be a systematic change. I think there's going to be some things that have to come down from the top and as we work from the bottom. But there has to be a change in our community. And it starts with us having conversations, you know what to do, know who to call, the right language to use when you do call, you know, let them know there's a mental health situation that's happening, what's going on, so they are aware of the whole situation. So, you know, we got resources for you. Anything, just let me know, reach out, and we can get you connected.
I just want to point out that it's, you know, we're going back to the whole structural racism. And it's not just the police department. You know, I've worked in a number of places that I made calls that resulted in a police response. And so if I'm a person and I am biased or I am racist and I make a call because I decided that you did something and I make a call and the police respond, the problem may end with the police department, but it started over here with me. So there are many organizations that we're going to, that there's racism in those organizations, and they're the ones who are starting the problem that ends with the police. So we need to recognize that it is not just the police department. It is structural racism in so many organizations. And I'm a mental health provider, and I have worked with mental health providers who have caused damage to people's lives, who have caused, and when I say damage, it just makes my heart cry, because people of color, they were biased, and they made calls that were not appropriate because of the color of their skin. They didn't do it on purpose. They weren't purposely deciding that they got up that day and that they were going to damage somebody's life and their family's lives. They were racist. They didn't know. They didn't see it. And they needed to be trained. So it's a culture in our society, in our country. People need to be trained. They need to understand cultural humility. They need to understand that just because I'm loud don't mean that I'm getting ready to beat you down. And just because I say I want to beat you down don't mean I'm going to beat you down. So they need to understand that because of our racist experience, because of our slavery, there is a language that we use. I'm going to beat of me beating her down, but that is the product of me being a product of slavery. You know, that is in our culture. The fact that we whip our kids, that is in our culture from slavery. Isn't that what happened to us? Isn't that? Doesn't that sound like the slave owner's words? Doesn't that sound like their actions? So we need to recognize, they need to recognize, we as African Americans never got treatment for our slavery, did we? Did y'all have a meeting? And that is trauma. And that is part of our culture. And we have risen up, thankfully to God. We have risen up and we have survived. And we are a strong people. But we have some things, we have some byproducts of this slavery that our country and we as a people have to deal with. So let's work on that language. Let's work on that language and that behavior so that we can be more healthy.
Well, I can tell you, I want to thank everyone. We had a lot of comments in the chat. We had about 8 people online, and we have about 25 here in person. We're very grateful. Bishop Cross, the host, came down. We're very grateful. They opened up the facility since the fall, and we're going to be here on a regular basis as a healing hub. Mind, body, and soul. We're very grateful to all the parents and caregivers that are here, and our speakers, Brother Everson, I'm going to pronounce it wrong, Brother E. I'm going to just leave it there, Brother E. And Naomi D. Amen. And Elder Gerard, who's out there in the community, working in a number of different levels, and all the participants. And I want to also thank Wilson Foundation for sponsoring the lunch, and our mental health advocates on the line, Heather, Vincent, Selena, and Dan from Channel 8, thank you, and Tina from Utica, and another parent. We're grateful that you're with us, not just by word, but by action. And we are going to look forward to partnering with them as we continue these trainings for our parents in the community and caregivers. I can't tell you how many grandmothers that are fearful that their grandchildren are going to either end up in the grave early or industry or the jail. And we know many of our Black and brown male boys that are out in these jails, the mental health system failed them. We also know we have a cultural stigma that we gotta address, that we have to address. So all this collective education and advocacy, we have to take ownership of it as parents, as people, to educate each other and to support each other. I can't tell you how many Jerry Springer shows I had up in my house that I didn't want to talk about. But that's the reality. And then when I start talking about it, people say, you too, girl, you too. We have you too. You know, who wants to, they got Jerry Springer shows going on in there. Nobody, talks about that. The reality of that, a lot of shame and guilt. But I'm not saying we got to share all this publicly, but through this forum, we've had an opportunity to say, I've been there. There's nothing wrong with you. I've been there. How can I help you navigate this complex system? How can I encourage you as a parent that has had a child with the same situation? I feel you. I understand how emotionally exhausting it is. And we're not blaming you, but we want to help you. So again, I can't thank you enough. We have resource information. We have a number. I'm a firm believer. I'm going to give you resource information, but I'm also going to tell you the reality that many of those resources that we hand out around mental health services and advocacy, we all know they have their systems issues. We call a wait list, or what kind of insurance do you have, or we can't help you. We know the reality. We have everyone in this community say, oh, we got these great resources, but we know the truth. We know the reality, there's wait lists.
What kind of insurance you got?
We know that question before you go through the door. We're kind of who's gonna pay for it. So that's the reality, but we want to change the system that was not built for our children and our adult children. So I can't thank you enough for joining us. We'll let you know the topic of next month, which will be the third Saturday in April. And we need to tell someone, a neighbor, tell a pediatrician's office about this group. We're not going anywhere. We're advocates. Our voice is going to get louder, but louder expecting change, not to just be chitter chatting, but louder to bring about change. So again, thank you for joining us in person. Thank you, thank you, thank you for sharing your time and volunteering to be a part of this conversation today. Thank you. If you got bad sandwich, take it with you now. You got sandwiches and water. Thank you, guys. We'll be in touch. Hi. How you doing? I should like the shoes. Going to a birthday party. Who you going to a birthday party with?
Okay, Sarah, very, very, very interesting. Very, very, very.
You know what? You know I'm preaching tomorrow.
Here?
Uh-huh.
Oh, I got a phone there.
Yeah, I'm preaching tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm very.
I know. Okay. All right. Thank you so much. My hair is-
Yeah, I'm gonna take it to a little birthday party. Me and Kelsey's supposed to be there tomorrow.
Okay. Yeah, a few of us are speaking. I'm
But
sorry.
like I said, you know, this is, oh my God. Anyway, I can help, you know?
No,
Just let me
absolutely.
know. Very, I get it out.
We'll be in touch.
No, like flyers to put in, like around it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff.
Yeah,
How much?
we are. We're going to
You
get
know,
there.
the flyers to put, you know.
Because we can start having them over at that rec center. The city will let us have a group in there.
Because I know on the outside, where we go from, let's go all the time. Let's go all the time.
Yeah,
You know?
we can do that.
Yeah. Okay.
Bye, Justice. Okay. Okay. All right, be careful. All right.
Okay, come to
Bye. Thank you, Dan. I don't know if you're still here, but thank you.
Hi. Your daughter and my grandson was basically almost alike.
Wow.
You know, I need help with him.
Okay.
I know Jerron had a little